All right, mahalo everyone and welcome back. As we continue in the second part of our morning discussion, we now open up for the question and answer session. You have an opportunity again on the yellow index cards that are being distributed to write down any questions that you may want to ask of our panel. And we will come by and grab those from you as you are completed. If not, I'm sure there is no shortage of topics that these women could talk about.
Oh, yeah. Petite Sirah.
I know. Just get Keiki going on another discussion around wine.
The flavors.
Oh.
Wine, and then maybe something around desserts.
Absolutely.
I think something around desserts.
I'm
yeah.
on a maintenance diet.
Yeah, that would have been perfect.
Well, I have a question to kick us off, Aaron, if
Very
we can
good.
go ahead and start. And I'm sorry, I have my back to some of you, but this chair is kind of hard to turn, so. But feel free to come along this side if it helps you to be closer. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Maikai. So one of the questions, we were just talking story during the break, during the pause, and about, I don't know if it's an elephant on the table or a monster in the room or whatever you have it, but some of us really struggle, and Kamehameha talked about walking in two worlds. I think when we're defining measures of student success, that becomes really hard to do, and I was asking our panelists, why is it so hard to define measures of success that work for our OPO? And so they had some good thoughts I thought they should share. Any of you want to start? Who wants to start? Go Malia.
So just a couple of quick thoughts. One, I think, is the language that's used. I know that we all respond in some, perhaps I know I respond negatively when I ever hear evidence-based practice, right? This notion that prove it, that prove the worthiness. And I think if, again, we can repurpose some of that to think about, well, it's not about evidence to prove to somebody else, but it's about celebrating and strengthening and documenting our value. So Terry Cross, who's at the National Indian Child Welfare Association, has really advanced this flipping of that practice-based evidence, documenting what's working well in our communities, but then leveraging that up, synthesizing that in a way. So it's not a discrete indicator and a data point, but it's about practice and it's about what's working well. And there are some of those things that I think that can be translated. So instead of just kind of putting that out of our minds as, that's their language, to actually repurpose that. And I think the second piece of kind of rethinking, we were talking about this idea that when we were doing this work in Alaska, we presented these metrics back, and we moved towards this role-centered success. What we learned was that we needed a whole different set of layers of indicators, that our kids don't just exist in schooling institutions or in the education realm. They're encountering health institutions, health challenges, economic, thinking about workforce development, jobs, what is education leading toward at the back end, how are our families struggling or seeking new opportunities in an economic realm. So we really have to push back against just using education indicators. We have to think broadly across disciplines, but a lot of our data systems are not set up to speak to one another, right? Apples and oranges. And a lot of that comes because so much of the research is driven by academic discipline, right? We have a lot of tribal leaders saying to us in the health realm, we can't get university researchers to look at the fact that to look beyond human health. We know that so much of what's happening in our environments, in our water systems, in our air, is affecting human health, but they're not set up to look at the relationship between human and environmental health. It's the same with these education measures. So we really advanced a different model where we looked at individual student measures, which aren't just about education, but are about health or about wellness broadly. Then we looked at family measures, and then we looked at community measures broadly. We didn't quite get to the spirit piece, which is that third layer that I talked about, what it means to be a human out, but we're working towards that. But there's a lot of question about, can you measure spirit, right? And that lends to a whole different kind of conversation. But if you think again about measurement as documenting value, demonstrating value, it changes the discourse and the language. So those are just a couple of the ideas we're playing with.
Thank you. Keiki, Nāmaka,
from
your perspective, what are your thoughts?
Jumping on that
Every
one
time
earlier.
I think about that, I sort of feel like when you walk into a world, do you walk in this and then you have to walk through another door to go into another world? Don't they coexist at the same time? And basically, I started to think back, okay, first of all, you cannot walk simultaneously in two worlds in that kind of thinking. So So consequently, I think we end up standing at the fence a lot of time, figuring out if we're jumping like this between the fence. And that's an awi. You gotta have long legs, which I don't have, and be able to jump high, which I can't do.
Flat shoes.
So, really simply, if we think about our own homes, don't we try to aspire to prepare our children with the best of our knowledge and practices and behaviors and preparedness in the home, that we assume that if we do a good job in that they take that core into whatever place that they go. So they come from a place and take that with them. That's a different place than feeling like you gotta be in this or the other. So I'd like to kind of lay that out. I think it's that basic, and maybe we just kind of forget how basic the answers really are for us.
You have something to add, or if not, I have a question
No,
that's
go ahead for
directed
the questions.
to
No, I had,
for you.
no, I'm done.
Okay, mahalo. Kako, what she said.
Yeah.
So Nāmaka, you had talked about policy changes that would help us. So this question is really asking for a little bit of elaboration about what kind of policy changes would help with supporting Olelo Hawaii as a second language in our state, or as an official language of our state.
Okay, well, I have that on one of my slides.
Plan.
I've been thinking about this how many years already? What are the policies? Okay, so because I was thinking about, so we know my the whole thing with the language, yes, so our language as a instruction base in schools, and being able to really have that support for this pathway. And we've grown, of course. I don't know if you all know that the census, first of all, the 2010, the number of families that identified Hawaiian language use now, 24,000 in the U.S., almost 25,000, nearly 17,000 reside here in the state of Hawaii. So that went from, I think in the 2000 census, like 2,000 or something like that, was very, very low, and then now we're up like that. Anyway, we're very, very small numbers. So we have a growing number of families that are using Hawaiian in the home too. So we've come 30 years, we're cycling back in. We have students that have graduated and are now having children, and have their children in schools that are using Hawaiian as a language of instruction. So some of the policies, so I talked about an accountability system for schools that are using these, and what we're doing here in Hawaii will help with other schools that are using their native language in instruction. So if we start to think about a bigger, broader base like that, kind of like locking our arms and linking up to have the movement like that. So policies that support the development and use of appropriate assessments. So we'd have to make sure, I talked about that earlier, about what would those appropriate policies that support appropriate assessments. I talked a little bit about accommodations. So when you're having this big national, 7-8 multiple state drive on one end on English language-based schools, how do we carve out part of that, pull out some of that, tease that away into support some of the work that needs to be done, hasn't been done yet, but it needs to be done around support for these appropriate assessments that measure the knowledge that we were talking about earlier. So that discussion has to occur as to what that knowledge and skill sets would be in the 21st century. Everything is based on the college and career ready. So the big idea is college and career ready. And then in the beginning of this, we talked about in the culture-based education on Monday, it was college and career and community ready. So we started to even go further about college, career, and community. So we want to build off of that. So we have to do, we talk about language matters so that we know that, and these are the national academies that have been over 100 years of research. These are the big institutional, they guide the federal government as to what they're going to, and national, 100 years over. in the research and development that has been over there, yeah, and not here. So this kind of, but even in their own research, they talk about that language matters, and that and that there is a distinctive alignment, you know, of for us. I'm talking about the childhood development that's relative to language. So. And the impact of language of instruction on the curriculum, teacher practices, and socialization. So you talk about curriculum, teacher instruction, and assessment in that triangle. So it has to be lined up like that. So the policies would be aligned like that: curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Policies that support multiple measures of student and school progress, kind of what we were talking about earlier, multiple. We want to have multiple, and that's actually in the law, current in the law, that there are multiple, there's an avenue for multiple assessment, but we haven't really made use of that. So it does exist. There are certain, there are already in existence federal policies that support the use and the protection of our native languages. So it's there. So it's kind of, like I was saying earlier, you know, redirecting some of what's going, you know, like I said, you know, on the full throttle on steroids, you know, that's taking us over there rather than trying to take some of that repurpose into this. Okay, so, okay, Kalamai. And then involvement, policies that would involve the practitioner experts, those of us that have been doing this work in revitalization of our native language. It's not us, we have the Navajo, there are others out there that we can bring into the discussion so that we can have a broader base of support for the work that needs to be done. You know, in understanding what are the processes for developing instruments that would be appropriate for us to use. You know, identifying those domains of assessments, you know, what will those measures be? You know, I mean, I think we need to be talking about those kinds of things. I mean, I'm not saying I get all the answers, but I was no overall, you know, Keiki.
Can I build just on a couple of those really quickly? I think Title VII is one area that we can build some synergy around between American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian in terms of the data that's out there. We've been really struggling to get that data from the federal level. They keep telling us that it's going to the state level, but we're concerned about Title VII going away if we don't demonstrate and document how it has value, and that's one of the few pieces that we have. The other is around, I think, native languages in federal policy. We at NCAI, the National Congress of American Indians, where I work, we just met at our last Reno mid-year conference, and we had a native languages working group, and we've just reinitiated this, and we wanted to share this with you because Esther Martinez is a really important lens and lever, but we think there's more to be done on the federal policy level in terms of supporting and celebrating native languages and their value and leveraging resources that way. So I think there's an opportunity, and this is again part of that history of the divide and conquer, that the whole notion of federally recognized, you know, state recognized, non-recognized, this is something that we have to push through and recognize that we have shared synergy in this. And I think the teacher piece is a huge one. In every movement that I've seen around the world in terms of indigenous education, indigenous teachers have been a core part. And I know that there have been communities that have set goals like, we're going to graduate 1,000 indigenous teachers. Australia, for example, in the 80s set this goal, and it allowed the community to come together around a vision to move, and teachers as cultural brokers, as the drivers of a system of education. And I don't know why we've kind of gotten away from that, of really looking at how we support our teachers, but I think a lot of it has to do with federal policy around teacher training, you know, and I remember Linda Smith and Graham Smith in Aotearoa talking about their language movement. The moment that it got co-opted was when they had to accept some national resources, and the first thing that got challenged was, well, who are the teachers? Well, the elders, well, they're not certified, right? So they always go for the teachers. We've got to flip that and go, okay, then we need to start supporting our teachers in some of those pieces. The last thing I'll point out on policy too is data. I think that Dr. Crabb talked about that this morning. If you, this is for American Indian context, but I think it applies in the Native Hawaiian as well. If you check American Indian and Asian, for example, on your school forms in terms of providing data, you're now by the Department of Ed being reported as only mixed race information. If you check Hispanic at all and then American Indian, Alaska Native, you're only being reported as Hispanic. It's not that they don't have the data, they're just not reporting it at that level. I believe it's the same for Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander in relation to the Hispanic. So we've seen this have immediate impacts in terms of what we can access about federal data about our kids and what's happening with our systems in order to hold those systems accountable. So I think there's immediate move we can make if the data is something that we're interested in, knowing that we have to improve the data quality and data systems, but even just getting access to those data pieces, building institutes and really thinking about policy advocacy around how that data works and how the definitions of Indian, definitions of Native Hawaiian are being co-opted at that federal level. Again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it always just kind of seems to come back to tracing that threat. So I think there's some real key policy levers around teachers, data, language in these pieces here that we can, in Title VII, we can build from.
Thank
I just want
you.
to talk on one thing real quick. We have the NALA Act that has gone through several revisions.
Native American Languages
The Native
Act.
American Languages Act. So we have some of these things in place, but how they operationalize that goes back to the scarcity model. So it gets
Co-opted.
endangered, struggling, dying languages to do this between one another because we only have this much resource. So there needs to be a different process in which they implement the law. And I think that's something that we can address.
Good. So we have a lot of questions. Wow, you guys are so akamai. Can I just really quickly, Malia, since you were talking about it, you kind of alluded to it, and you had talked about safer danger zones. What is the perception of Indigenous culture in DC? Is it a safe time, or is it a danger zone?
My sense, I would say that we perhaps had been in more of a safe zone, but because, I would say because of sequestration, all of us are facing definite danger when it comes to difference, but it's because of the scarcity model. We've got to figure out what that one direction kind of path is. Anything that's alternative is extra, is excessive, and I think that there's also, you have to look at the demographics of the U.S. When you have a rising Hispanic population, difference, language is becoming centered in a way, and I think there's some opportunities with that. I mean, we're looking at like the mascot issue, for example, in D.C. We don't really use the term of the team, the R word, we call it, the Washington team. I won't repeat, you can fill in the blank, but there is some real movement and solidarity amongst the D.C. mayor and the D.C. community to say, if you want to move that team back into the town of D.C., you have to change its name. So we're seeing on a media level that there's some opportunity to really think about culture and difference. But I remember just yesterday reading about the Asiana crash in San Francisco, how Korean culture is now being framed as part of the challenge in that. So you're seeing this moment where culture, there's an opportunity to have that national discussion, but I think the racism is very, very present, and especially when you're in a scarce moment. So I think the whole issue of the safe and the dangerous this is a binary that is problematic for us, whether we're safe or we're dangerous, because it's somebody else saying to us, what the value of our cultures are, and that's not good enough because it's always going to come back to this divide and conquer. They're not being enough, so we have to take back the reins on that front and really say, well, it's not about being safe or dangerous, it's about here's the value that this community adds in this way, here's the value that this community adds, and here's how we can actually support each other as Americans, as people of indigenous places in that kind of context.
Thanks. So it seems like we've done we've got a really good head start, maybe with Nahuna Mauliola, and there's a couple of questions about that.
There's a couple questions.
So one, can you just talk about whether the standards are listed in any order of importance, or if some are more foundational than others, and then how would we take that model to create or translate to an assessment tool? How would we use that foundation to create an assessment tool?
First of all, the 9 ala ike, with their envisioning statements and their action statements, are broad. They are like the tenets, are educational tenets of success, if I could put it that way. What has to happen with that is a definition that's coming from each and every single one of our places. So if we don't have a clarity at our school how we fit into that, that's not, Nahonua Maoli is not going to help us. So I think that's part of the frightening step, but that is the empowering step that we need to make in order to figure out how that aligns to curriculum, to teacher development, to school and program development, to assessing and accountability. And I think therein lies the beauties of our community, that we could use these 9 tenets in their broadness and bring it to a closer definition in the different models that we do, because we all know we are many shades of brown. So each of our programs, be it even in immersion, are not the same as another, although they value language as a major vehicle of success and goal and vision. Does that make sense? So now the onus comes on us to take some of these bits of ike from our knowledge fund and figure out what that means for our school. Because until we do that, we can't make any of these changes that we're talking about today.
And I don't know if it's helpful, but what you just said, and it reminds me of what we did in Alaska with the values from the cultural standards to creating the spiral curriculum, which is called Supporting Pathways in Rural Alaska Learning. If you just type in spiral curriculum, I can get you the website, but it's on the Alaska Native Knowledge Network, and they use this as a 7th through 12th grade curriculum at what's called the Effie Cochran Charter School in Fairbanks, Alaska, to build a spiral curriculum, so it builds on each other from 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, but you have curriculum modules along each of the values, the principles that came from those standards movement, and it also it relied on charter schools, right, to be able to set your own curriculum, to choose your own staff, but they've had some success in that
And there's
space.
some alignment that they use, for example. They went through the various 5 tribes.
Yes, yeah.
And they asked,
The
what are your
cultures, yeah.
values and beliefs? What does education mean to you? So each of the tribes are beginning to define that. So not one tribe was defining for another. So now when we're talking about doing charter school movement, they've got a base and a foundation that comes from their own thinking that they can build from, and now they can offer that up as strengths to help across tribes. See, that's the kind of synergy we need to create, but it puts a lot of onus back on us, and I think we're ready for that.
Kako. So we have some charter school folks in the house. Wave your hands. Hi, yeah. All right, well, let's talk about charter schools. So since the DOE is very difficult to, we talk about systems of support and how hard it is sometimes to build those for culturally and native language unique groups. What about charter schools? Is that an option for us to create the kind of flexibility that we require, or even homeschooling as an option? Let's talk about some of those ideas. I mean, why not, or do we create our own system, or any thoughts about that? Anyone want to jump in first? So do charter schools become an option to create more flexible requirements and standards and assessments for students,
Okay,
particularly in a Native Hawaiian
The
or
answer is
homeschooling?
I. What is the answer? I. Charter schools already took the first brave step to say this model that I'm regular in and regular mainstream education isn't working for us. You already start with the core force, the workforce is saying we want to create something different and be accountable to what definition we're driving at. So I think that's already building on strengths. I also think we need to create another system because that's not working. And I don't believe that there's one model that works the best for all of us. But in saying that, I'm going to say this again, it puts the onus back on us to do the work because nobody can do it for us. That's the bottom line. But we have to be accountable and be ready for those long hours that's not new. We've all been doing it. That's why everybody's sitting here, because we've been of that same kind of mindset to move in that way.
Were you asking that because of the, to expand on the charter school?
We had talked about the move to Common Core and assessments and the rigidity of systems and how that impacts Indigenous communities in a negative way. And so do charter schools or homeschooling or other private school options become something that we should invest in to a greater extent?
Yeah.
And
I think,
Kamehameha schools was mentioned there, but
yeah, and I think
as a funder.
Yeah,
Hopefully we can do better than that.
yeah, give them. I think the charter school, the charter school movement though was all about creating the autonomy, creating autonomy and curriculum by that community, for that community, as identified as a need for that community. So 1999 at the, I think it was a school, what was it called? The student-centered school thing, and the first two schools converted, became the first two charter schools, Wai'alae and Lanikai. And Lanikai. So those are the first two, and we know those districts. Right after that, when the big opening, more than, I think, half, I want to say, came out of our Native Hawaiian communities, going for it, so.
And by the way, 11 of those Hawaiian-focused charter schools have been accepted for accreditation candidacy, and 5 of them are already accredited, so that's really amazing.
Well, and
And so those, you said 5 of them were?
Have been accredited.
Have been accredited.
Have received accredited.
So, that's based off of their models, their current model. So that was huge.
And most of them are immersion schools, actually.
Of those 5, most of them were immersion?
Yeah.
Oh.
Hawaiian medium.
Okay.
a part of what I hear you saying is that at some level they are the vehicle or a mechanism for the community to build that momentum. And I think that's what I've seen has been a challenge with some of the analysis around charter schools and charter school policy, is that the policymakers focus on the mechanism rather than the movement, and can actually slow it down. And I hear what you're saying about it, not one size fits all by any means. If that community chooses that as a mechanism, then who are we to stand in the way of allowing that to come through? But I think that when policy focuses just on the systems level aspect of it, that's when we hear the critiques, and that's when we hear, again, the scarcity coming in about, the resourcing pieces,
right.
Because we're looking at the wrong thing. We're looking at the system, the school success again, right? Charter schools as a system versus what it actually stands for and what it kind of sits behind, or what sits behind it in terms of community saying, we want to choose who our staff are, we want to choose what our curriculum is and what the outcomes for our youth are. And so I always say, look at that system, but peel back the layers. Are there Indigenous teachers, sitting behind that? Are the students, what are the relationships between those teachers and families in that space? And if that system makes sense, that reflects the values that come through, then more power to it. But I think we get into these conversations about, are charter schools useful, or are they not, as policies, and we miss, I think, some of the momentum and the movement behind it.
Yeah, and I forgot to even mention that some of the measures should include those satisfactory parent satisfaction. Parents, ohana, the power in families. I think that's we should take advantage of that too, because that's what we see in our
Backing the charter school
backing the charter
movement.
schools are those communities,
Excellent. Aren't they doing a great job of answering these questions? Mahalo to you folks. Here's one that's really intriguing me, and I think we've touched on it, but it might be a different way of going about the question. Where do you think Native Hawaiian education is going in the wrong direction or missing target opportunities? Yeah.
Not it.
You're going to get us in trouble.
Go ahead. We will
This
follow
is the
you.
Hawaiian Education Summit.
Anyway, where are we going wrong?
Yes.
Or missing target opportunities. Maybe that's the...
Missing opportunities. Well, I don't like that. To even think that we might be missing out on something. Oh, I gotta think hard.
Okay, keep
What are
that
we
one.
missing? Yeah.
Keep that
Do
one
you
in.
want examples?
Sure,
I have
however
a couple. I
you...
don't think they're going to be user-friendly if I open my mouth.
Okay, well then stay away from those. Like,
No, no,
think
we
about
must- yeah, we must-
how to answer
Okay, we'll
that.
be thinking, yeah.
But I'll say something real quick. I think one of the directions we're moving wrong is jumping the hoops of the expectations for assessment and evaluation. And immersion is a really good example. I can speak really well from that. And this whole issue of testing at 3rd and 4th grade in English at a time that they've never been formally addressed through the English. And then it starts to be, well, why can't they read? I take them to McDonald's because there are processes that are unaligned, they're misaligned with the regular process of mainstream. And you can't hold mainstream expectations on a different set of processes. It's a setup for failure. And then you want to put in money to translate. We got all kinds of issues around that. We're struggling to revitalize our language. So what style, vocabulary is being used? No, it's $1 million issue. And what do we get for that? For a couple hundred children. I'd rather spend that money on teacher development, what schools are doing in their schools. I think that's the wrong direction.
That's what you were talking about. That's what you're talking about, tucking away, putting a safe. What do we say? Safe and danger. We're heading in the danger zone on that one, so we got to go back to the safe zone and tuck us away. And rely on other measurements to
argue amongst us instead of pulling the best of our strengths, because if staying focused is our Keiki. And it pulls us away from that. So respectfully to my whole out in the audience. And it's been a huge argument amongst us. Yeah.
Well, I have a feeling this topic will come up again, especially about assessment for Hawaiian medium and immersion students. What about, you had mentioned something interesting about Alaska. Wait, how do you do it? There.
That's the chain.
And north and south. And in terms of data, this question is about whether we should be looking at assessment results comparing Native Hawaiians to Native Hawaiians. Aside from HSA, what other, and then aside from HSA, what other assessments are there that are more feasible to collect to tell our mo'olelo of success?
Yeah, so that's definitely what we're trying to do in Alaska, is comparing Alaska Native to Alaska Native, and in the idea that we have those strengths that we can build on. So if you think about an island kind of comparison, or whatever regionality makes sense here in Alaska. For us, it was our cultural linguistic regions, which align to our Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. So there's both a cultural and a political link that drives the data analysis that we're doing. So we're not just doing school to school, Native students in X school to Y school. We're actually trying to align our community boundaries to each other. And the idea is then to be able to have kind of a broader sense of Alaska Native success, and to then be able to compare it to what's happening in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to develop some of that. And that's where a lot of my dissertation work was, to go to Aotearoa to say, they're graduating, they set a goal of graduating 500 Maori PhDs in 5 years, right? Which they not only hit, but they superseded. Graham Smith wanted to come and bring that vision to Canada and then also to Alaska. Our elders in Alaska said, we have a much more contentious relationship with the university. It may not fit, but come and see what we're doing. And so it's in that spirit of, we want to share what worked for us. It may not fit, but if you want to build some of that translation piece, you can do that. But it has to come first from a sense of what's working in your region. Angayukak Oscar Coagli, who passed, who is a mentor, I think, for many of us, would say, we have to know who we are as Arctic people, what that means when we stand in this place. We have language that we speak to the earth to enact our responsibilities to the Arctic regions. But we need the people in Brazil to speak their languages, right? We can't speak that language in that part of the world to support the harmony and the stewardship in that space, but we need to be in relationship to those people. And so it's this idea about standing firm in that place, in who you are, and then being able to, that enables you to then link up, when you fly, put your mask on first before assisting the person next to you. It's a simple concept, but it's the idea you got to take care of your, and so if you're building these kind of measures, the other one I think that we've been looking at is happiness measures, really thinking in different ways about what success looks like. PISA is also one, the international standards for assessment, engaging with these measures. So we're not always trying to recreate, but thinking, are there pieces from existing measures that can work in these ways? But the last thing I'll say is a friend, Malia Tauli'i, who I believe is here at UH, she said that they were working on comparative health measures. And she said, we had to be really careful though, Malia, because if the concept of, the Maori in New Zealand are doing, loads ahead of every other indigenous group, then maybe the New Zealand government doesn't need to support them in the ways that, they're good, they got this, right? Scarcity comes back into the figure. So she said that when you do these kind of cross-community comparisons, you do have to be careful. A lot of times it needs to be internal and kind of amongst ourselves as indigenous educators and people in this way. But just realizing that even when, especially when we're doing good work, the threats and the challenges are going to come. So just being careful.
Interesting.
The danger zone comes back.
I wanted to, add on this piece of measurements and taking and seeing what instruments are out there that could be adapted and useful for us to have. So we have created such a measure for us at Punana Leo, and is utilized at Navahi, where we can actually, on the science of automaticity, in taking that and using some of the research off of that, and then working with our schools, like I said earlier about with a Navajo program that has their school in Navajo and Ojibwe, that we're, it's grassroots pilot, really out of no institutional big thing other than the support to get it started, but to look at what is out there that we can adapt to our specific language bases and have a way of measuring your performance as teachers with your students and the progress as one arena one area that you're looking strictly at language, in language fluency. So,
Can you say what that's called?
the curriculum-based measures, yeah. In curriculum-based measures, so.
CBMs.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Evidence is strongest in the language field. We're grasping for evidence around culture base, and where we always end up is, Terry McCarty and others have put out your work, to show that language matters. It's the clearest, that when we invest in indigenous language, the confidence and the wellness of our children is affirmed. And so it just drives me crazy that we feel, that we have to constantly prove this kind of space because we know this, this. How do we then implement and build towards those systems in that way?
Speaking of broken, this comment is about the special education system and how it's broken at all levels throughout the country, not just here in our state. And how can we change from a system that views children as broken and deficient to one that truly recognizes and values their uniqueness and each child's potential? And I'm not sure if there's an indigenous context to frame that question in for you folks. What are your thoughts about special education and some of the strengths-based measures we've been talking about?
Actually, I think the answer was in the question, is that we look at special ed as a deficit, as something broken and something wrong, instead of celebrating those specialness within us, because in some ways we're all special ed, and in some ways we all have genius. And I would say, I'd be proud to say that I think that is a mana'o Hawaii. It is a mana'o of the 5 tribes in Alaska. It is an indigenous understanding that we celebrate all of those parts because we're a bit of all of them. So I think the answer is to get rid of assessing and dealing with it as something broken. And that model is basically how we even look at Western medicine. We go and look and see where the problem is, but we forget that this problem was connected to a lot of other things. And instead of healing that, we address the one thing with a specific medicine. So that does not work in special ed either.
It's just like taking, you have a piece of thread, and then you go and you pull, because the thing is hanging, you would pull, and then plenty stuff come, the whole hem come off. Because it's all connected, but you're thinking, oh, you just gotta go and you wanna just cut,
I don't know if the
fix
young
your
folks
dress.
know about sewing anymore, right?
And to say this, that sometimes, when you see that that thing gonna hemo, then you just go and you make the knot. So you paw that again. You put the knot and you put them back in,
Is
and
there
then
an
you wait.
app for that? Is there an app for that?
And then you wait till you get home and you get your needle and your tray and you sew them back up again. But you don't go try pull because it's connected.
Tape.
Yeah, tape. Yeah, it's connected. Everything.
Okay.
Everything
We're
connected. Yeah, the old adage. Knee bone to the shin bone to the hip bone, everything all connect.
And I was talking to one of the complex area superintendents, actually she brought it up as an area of concern, how the students who go through immersion education come to intermediate school and immediately get put into special ed. And so that's an example of the system being broken as opposed to not recognizing the talents that the kids are bringing to the table and treating it more as an ELL issue, which
I think that's where we have a little bit of shortcoming here in the state is really educating the educators and having more of that time to share, yeah?
And seeing difference as excellence, right? This idea that it's special, that we should celebrate it, that the whole notion of even cross-cultural, that's something that our employers value, that other systems value. Why can't we see that as a value in our schooling, that difference can actually add such a beautiful lens onto learning and building relationship, taking care of each other in those kind of contexts. And I think one of the spaces where I see a real need in the special ed discourse, in addition to the whole identifying someone as special needs, as having that, and a lot of the pharmaceutical drive behind what's going on. I'm really worried about our young boys in particular, hyperactivity, how health and eating, all fuels how we understand that learning. But I think there's a need also for relationships between parents who are supporting their kids through systems of special needs. I have one of my dear friends, used to be my boss at the Alaska Native Policy Center, has a daughter who has what's called Prader-Willi syndrome, very rare syndrome. She's over 18 now. There just aren't supports, and she's just desperately trying to build, community and support for herself to how to support her child through her experiences. And so I actually sit on NCAI's Elders and Disability Committee. I'm the staffer for that. So if there are those of you in the audience who, we can help support and we want to build some momentum, we're having our Tulsa meeting, our annual meeting in October, and we're going to have some special featured focus areas on disabilities kind of broadly, but I'd really love to have a focus on the education system and what we can do to support our families who are working with systems that are not seeing difference as a value in that space.
That issue of family, increasing family knowledge and parents' ability to advocate for their child and not just take what the educator says or the health professional says and do, but really say,
push back.
Recognizing the excellence and difference and pushing back. And
I do want to say something. I'm just going to be brave.
Yeah, be brave.
I think, when I come to these things, a lot of times I leave and I go, wow, I feel so inspired by this kind of thought, but that's not, the reality of that isn't going to happen at the place I'm at. So we leave and feel inspired for a few minutes and go right back into the same old mode and feel like nothing, we're not empowered to make any of the change. And so I think that's what's grating at my now right now. And so what I want to say to everybody is the key is for us to take the first steps by changing our behavior in that direction that we desire to go. And part of that is beginning to change and ask some of the questions differently around the alignment of our belief systems and our goals and our vision for education. And it takes lots of courage for us to do that and ask that. But as numbers increase, it gets simpler when more people are asking those same kinds of questions and the behaviors are starting to shift in different ways. It has a domino effect. I think immersion is a really good example of that. Who would have thought that 24,000 people would have marked on, that they speak Hawaiian in their homes? So, and whatever that means, how fluent it is or is not, the fact is, the momentum has caused a huge change. And so that now is left within us to really work with the people in our communities and ask ourselves those tough questions. Be a little bit more humble about the way that we are discontent in what things aren't happening, and really aim for building the strengths and the talents that we have in our faculty and our staff, in our parents and community to figure out how to leverage that better for a more collective goal. And I really believe that that's possible. I believe with all my heart that that's possible, but it only can happen if we choose to shift those behaviors and attitudes.
Thank you. So this is another question. It's kind of a segue. Definitely the DOE and the Hawaii P20, the state has set out standards, and the nation has set out standards about post-secondary success. Well, it's really college success, post-high success. Why is that important? Is it really important for Native people to achieve higher education? How does it make a difference?
It's really important for Native people to feel productive.
Say that louder.
It's really important for Native people to feel productive and valued in the communities that they live in. You know, that tie, it has a tie to career, but we don't always, in our native sense, you know, big deal, you're a doctor in my family if you can't be a contributing member to the family. You know, so there's kind of the shift of what we look at the things. So I think I'm concerned about that. I have young children that are now young parents, you know, that are struggling like we did at our time in our 20s, trying to find their place that matches with the purpose they feel in their gut from their upbringing that we've given them for immersion. This is hard. And you know, we spend so much time with our babies, but not enough in preschool. You know how tough time of their life that is? To be in a place that they're supposed to know more of the answers and be supposed to be more focused to go for that career, but other things are pulling them about what they value as they're starting to have children and the responsibilities in the community. I think we need to spend a little bit more time to look at that. And this is the other thing I want to add. Our communities struggle because they don't always have the glitz of the metropolitan city. And we live in, you know, a lot of our communities are small communities. We live there because we like that quality of life. But tough for our young people to find employment because employment's not there like it is traditionally in other places. So we need to take that next step as we're doing things like regrounding our students back to the Aina. We're doing projects like reforestation. How do we link that with what we're doing and build those career paths in our communities that begin to develop those dynamics? I think we're not spending enough time in that area either, and I really worry about that.
One of the data points we've been talking about is that by 2018, 65% of the jobs in Hawaii will require some post-high degree. And so if we start preparing our youth toward that end, does that really level the playing field? I mean, does it make a difference?
Well, and I mean, that's one of the things that I learned from Dr. Linda and Dr. Graham also in New Zealand when I said to them, why set a goal of graduating 500 Maori PhDs? You know, what is that about? Why would an indigenous community invest so heavily, not just in higher education, but at the highest level, at some assessment? And what they said was a couple of things. One was the cultural value about what I ended up calling a push me, pull you kind of approach, that they needed folks at the highest level to help pull up that next generation. So it's not just those trying to climb that ladder from that space, but you have role models. You have folks who we can hold up as models of success, and as those, we heard Dr. Crabb talk about, you know, the succession planning and being able to guide the direction of that. So I think that was one of the pieces, but the other was, they said we are moving into a data economy, a knowledge-based economy, and we need folks to sit on the national councils who have very little accountability at this moment for decision-making that's happening. The president, on April 10th, President Obama launched his R&D, his research and development budget for 2014. It was a historic gathering where you have the heads of the National Science Foundation, the head of the National Institutes for Health, the head of NOAA, which we all know here in Hawaii very well, the heads of the Department of Defense, all in one space to launch a $143 billion budget. That's 4% of the whole US budget for research and development. You might think a big portion of that is defense. Very little is going to defense. This is medical research, this is research on a different level, and there are a set of priorities. Who do we have at that table advocating when they're pushing brain research, right? Which may have some good benefit for our elders and our veterans, but is about mapping the human brain in terms of, and our communities are the ones that are pathologized when it comes to human behavior. When it's about STEM jobs, right? The huge focus is on science, technology, engineering, mathematics. 1 million new STEM graduates in 10 years is the proposal. 100,000 new K-12 STEM teachers, right? This is what the president has proposed. What's our role in that? We need our young people, our communities to be supported into those places so that we can not only have a piece of that, but take responsibility for where the technology and the research conversation is going, and so that we can be at the table, because I think also the environmental components, which we know is so critical to our health and wellness, is on the table. How are we thinking about climate change? Up in Alaska, we know as our glaciers melt, your sea levels rise. We have responsibilities to each other in that science education realm. How are we building up that space and transforming that old scientific experiments? Draw a scientist, scientist. You guys remember that one? They had kids draw an image of a scientist, and often it was a white man, balding, glasses, in a lab coat, right? We want our kids to see themselves as the scientists in these kind of spaces, because that's where a lot of the decisions are being made in so many different realms. So we desperately need the college readiness, but we also need to tie higher education to workforce development, because I think that, college degree is definitely important. There are a lot of other kinds of achievements and trainings that we need to build into that as well.
Yep. So it's college and workforce development, and then also those different roles of being a community contributor and a contributor to our whole NOAA, right?
Citizenship.
That's what we said earlier,
those
college,
roles-
career, and community.
Exactly, and I think they're beginning to change because I'm at the higher education. So where a lot more discussion is, how are they applying what you're teaching them? So college to career to community. Where are they applying that into the community? Because the degree is nothing if you can't do anything with it. And maybe that's the put off for students not wanting to go to college, because they can't get themselves to discipline and learn in that way, in huge lecture halls and be tested on the content and skills. But higher education now is challenged, really challenged, to take a look at how it is we're really building them in more of mentoring capacity. And so I think we're taking some early beginning strides, but I think that's a good direction that will link up with this whole idea.
It's gotta connect.
From the P to 12 and then that college career.
That's the thread.
That's the thread. Don't pull that one.
Wonderful. Can I do a time check? Is Erin back there? How
It
much
is
time do we have?
10:49, so we got about 11
7 minutes. I was having trouble counting the fingers. Okay, so that intriguing conversation, and hopefully it plays into the continuing conversations around criteria and students' success and what we need to measure, and this one also will. And maybe we'll start with Malia and then see if, and then ask Nāmaka and Keiki to weigh in too. But can you address some important indicators that measure traditional cultural functions, spirituality, natural ways of learning and thinking, cultural practices, spirituality and natural ways of learning and teaching. Sorry, I'm having trouble reading your handwriting. So let me repeat. Can you address important indicators that measure traditional cultural practices, spirituality, natural ways of learning and teaching? And in particular, here's a similar question that it asks us to, where we're moving out of our ed silos and thinking more holistically around health, wellness, healing, spirituality, language. Any thoughts about that?
I don't know if this is going to answer the question directly, and I think you folks have a lot more expertise and insight on this, but I'll tell you a little bit about what we did in Australia. So as you may have heard in the bio, I was a part of the first national Indigenous evaluation of an Indigenous education initiative. In Australia, they had the Stolen Generations history there, and they made an apology, and the community said, that's all well and good. We appreciate the sentiment behind that apology. Now we need you to put your money where your mouth is and support our communities and what you've done and try to heal that. And so one of the investments was to invest in a national Indigenous education initiative, and a lot of it came down to retraining principals into how to lead schools that have students of cultural and linguistic difference, really. Stronger, Smarter initiative. There's lots more to say about that initiative. That was part of my postdoc. One of the things that I took out of that, though, was in how we understand how to support teachers in teaching our Indigenous students. And what we found in the research was that a lot of the previous assessments and training around this was about measuring what teachers of Indigenous students know and believe about Indigenous cultures. Through the guidance of an Indigenous educator named Lester Irabina-Rigney, who's an Australian educator out there in South Australia, he said, let's flip that a little bit. He said, I want to know how they come to know about our cultures. Do they come to know through the conversations they have around the table with other non-Indigenous teachers in the lunchroom? Do they come to know in the conversations they have with our Indigenous students? Do they come to know in being in community environments, cultural environments with parents, elders in that way? Is it from reading research articles about our people? How do they come to know? Just by virtue of shifting that question about what do you know and believe about Indigenous cultures, which often generates a PC kind of response, right? I'll tell you what I know and believe. we found that the knowledge and belief also did not translate to changes in practice, right? They could tell us what we wanted to hear, but it didn't have an effect on what they were doing in the classroom. So when we started measuring how they come to know, what we were actually doing was measuring relationship, right? Measuring how they build their familiarity and relationship to indigenous cultures. And that told us a little bit about their network. It told us about what kind of access they have. I know that in some of our communities in Alaska, God love them, they'll start betting on how long this teacher will stay in the community, right? We have this revolving door. It happened. We're betting people, you know, we like a little bit of a challenge on this. But, you know, that doesn't also help, you know, to acclimate and to build that piece. So just by virtue of thinking about what is, you know, what is indigenous or what is teacher expertise and what do teachers really need when it comes to doing, we tried to shift that a little bit. So it's not so much about the traditions and the cultural practice, but trying to understand more about how we understand the relationships of teacher to culture was one of the ways that we tried to shift that.
Thank you.
We have, I was just talking about, I'll give a plug for our indicators. I see our Wendy out there, but we came up with, you know, over a year, I think, or more than that, under the Native Hawaiian, was it more than that? Got some folks out here on the Native Hawaiian Education Council. You guys can all raise your hand. And so we worked with the input of many of probably you guys out there that helped us come up with some of those indicators that would measure or look to measure the success of Hawaiian or Native Hawaiian education. So that's a start. I think we're continuing. We had a little bump in the road, a little slowdown period. And we're moving forward now a little bit, putting gas back into the car, and then we're going to go again. And so we'll see what happens as we continue to float our indicators. And if you want to talk more about that, you can go and see Wendy. That's here. But anyway,
And there's
so
going to be some work later in this.
and you're going to be
right?
at the breakout sessions, yeah. So we'll
Thank you.
we have some positive stuff going on there.
Excellent. Anything?
I'm just going to put in a little plug to support the indicators, because I think that's a really good beginning for the conversation. The question is, are we going to ask the right questions around that as we're trying to assess where we are and get a kind of pulse from our communities around those indicators? But there are other work that has been being done internationally. And I'd like to put in a little plug for Bill Demerit's work before he passed on, his culture-based education matrix and his matrix on well-being. So I think what you'll find is you look through the indicators that the Native Hawaiian Education Council is working on and others like what Bill, you're going to see some commonalities that go across indigenous cultures. And I think we had an earlier discussion about looking for those strengths that we can hold hands as maybe also extra indicators of how well on target we really are with what we're doing. And we haven't done that.
Where can we get a hold of Bill's work?
Is it all, can we do that through the web?
There's a
I
research
don't know, some of
review.
us have access to that. We did our,
So you could see some of us after.
Yeah.
But it is, I think it's been published.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
So
been published.
we can find that
I
citation.
think I have some stuff in my dissertation if you want to ProQuest it.
Yeah.
Well, good. So I think maybe we'll just close with, allow each of you, if you want to share a closing thought or some advice to our attendees as they carry on through the day, or any other closing thoughts that would be helpful about our national accountability landscape and progressing in terms of linguistically and culturally unique peoples in our Native Hawaiian context. So any last words, any last thoughts, something that you didn't get to talk about that you wanted to, or mana'o?
I think well, first I want to mahalo, all of our kumu. I think our kumu, our teachers, our Absolutely. Those are in the classrooms are so. I have to from our teachers of our babies to our teachers of our young the pua to the adolescents and then into the big makua stage. You know, our teachers that are imparting, you know, their learning, their teachings coming from their own experiences, as well as gathering up more information from, you know, their education. I think that's, my hat goes off to you to have that energy. And it's a song, our Punana Leo song. So let's sing our Punana Leo song, everybody. And we're gonna make because it's a song, He Lala Vau no Ku'ukumu, okay? So I am a branch, yeah? So all of our old Punana Leo parents and new Punana Leo parents, and so I am a branch of my kumu, of my teacher, or from the stock of the tree and the branches. So He Lala Vau no Ku'ukumu, it's the kumu that teaches me, you know, and supports me in my it supports me, ko'o, yeah, ko'o mai. That when there's a lot of wind, a big wind that comes, you know, it comes about, you know, don't mai pilikia, just Malia, because will luli, and then things will settle down. And the second verse goes, I am a branch again of my teacher, and it's my teacher that supports me, pai, that when we have a lot of rain and, you know, nui, kaua, you know, don't get flustered because ua, when we have ua, when we uekalani from our tradition, uekalani ola kahonua. Yeah, so when our heavens rain, our earth lives. And then the third verse is He Lala Vau no Ku'ukumu, and that my teacher teaches me and helps me to grow ho'oulu, yeah? So my teacher ho'oulu mai, and puts on all of my decorations, my kumu is vehi, yeah? That puts on all of my lau vehi, and that teaches me that I am a flower, I'm a flower that is mohala. So from little babies all the way to we become old, we're still becoming, believe it or not, mohala, right? Lilikala, we all mohala. And when we get the titi sara, more better, we're going mohala.
Even better.
Yeah. So you can sit there and we'll just do our motions. And for our kumu, please, kokua mai, He Lala Vau. He Lala Vau no ku'ukumu, nana vau e ko'o mai. Ina ikaika ka makani, nana vau e a'o mai. Luli, ala I mali e ho. He lala vau no ku'ukumu, nana vau e pai mai. Ina ikaika kaua nui, nana vau e a'o mai. Ue kalani, aola ka honua. Hey, wait, the third one, because now we're going to mohala. He lala vau no ku'ukumu, nana vau ho'oulu mai. Me na lau vehi, nana vau e pai mai. He pua e, ke mohala nei. He pua e, ke mohala nei. Wasn't pai was at the end was ho'ulu. Kalamai, I'm still on here. Kalamai.
Yes, you are still on the mic. She's still mic'd up.
I was scolding myself.
That was beautiful. Yeah. Last words, or we can end on that note.
Well, maybe my last words is to encourage everybody over the next several days to continue the conversation in the various spaces in our formal structure of our Ed Summit, and also in our social spaces of the Ed Summit, because we're sitting on here, but I can truthfully and confidently say that we so don't have all the answers. And we only have a little smidget from our own experiences. And in our collective understandings and work is where we'll find the change in our discussions, our behavior, and the shift in our success with our la hui. Li'i li'i anui. Mahalo.
Malia? No last words from our DC friends?
Just to say thank you.
Well, we're going to be really excited, and Malia's going to be here. Or you're here for the rest of the conference,
Absolutely.
and so
Thank
good
you.
fun to talk to. Got a lot of exciting information. We're already requesting different articles and books from her, and it's really wonderful to have you here and all of you to be sharing with us this morning. So I know I feel so inspired and invigorated and hopeful that we can go back to our workplaces and our daily efforts to make a difference out there. And I know that I feel better doing that because all of you are here too alongside me. And so if we can holomua together. All right, so thank you for coming. Mahalo nui, have a great day.
Anna.